I'm going to demonstrate painting on canvas this morning. And I wanted to show you my reference that I'm going to paint from. This is a photograph that I acquired, and this is, I think it's in France. I love the flowers and the this particular figure walking along here. You see a gentleman way back here at the back. I love the colors, I like the contrast, the blacks and the whites, and just the different shapes. I'm a shape painter, so therefore I just really enjoy all these shapes. They're not going to be exactly like this because I always subtract and add whatever it depends on that makes a good composition. This is my reference, and this is my study. I always make a color study before I do a canvas because canvas, if you've never worked on watercolor canvas, it doesn't, not like the paper that absorbs the color. So therefore, everything I lay down on a canvas, if you go back over it, it lifts all of that up instantly the minute you put a brush load of fresh paint on it. So I always make a color study, so therefore that I can kind of have a guide. This is kind of my pattern. It's a map, the skeleton part of what I'm going to do on the canvas. So I know where I want my darks immediately. I know where I want my mid values, my lights, and so this is my guide. And I always keep it just kind of over to the side so I can look at it back and forth, because I know when I start putting color on this canvas, it's not going to behave the same way paper does. I'm using synthetic brush. It's 1.5 inches. I'll be using this and mostly all synthetic brushes, but I'm going to be using this brush. I can double load this brush, and there's a lot of things that I can do with this brush that I can't do with a round. Also, I want to show you my palette. My palette, I have various colors. This morning, I'm going to be using just some turquoise. I probably should have sprayed these and made them a little bit more moist, because I want more pigment than I have water. Starting out with the canvas. And as you know, this is Andrew's turquoise, and it's just a little bit opaque, so it takes it a little bit to warm up to the water. This is my purple. It's a cool purple. And as you can see, I'm putting quite a bit of pigment in that puddle. Always remember that when you're looking at a palette, someone demonstrating or teaching instructor, you always want to look at the amount of water they put in it. If they have a whole lot of water in it, it spreads out. If they're using just pure pigment, it stays very tight. And let's use a little bit of orange. This is Halloween orange. It's one of my favorite. It's a little bit opaque, but I do like it for a lot of things because it does stay on top, and you can thin it down. So it becomes more transparent. But as you can see, it's got a tight puddle to it. I think my turquoise needs just a little bit more depth to it. And because I want it to have a little bit more depth to it, I'm going to add just a little bit of phthalo turquoise with that to give it just a little bit deeper hue. Now those basically are the colors, the triads that I'm going to be using as I begin to paint in my on the canvas. Now, the fun begins. Always sketch on a canvas. This is watercolor crayon. It's Davy's Gray. Always sketch on a canvas with something that's water soluble. Watercolor pencil, even with the brush. Sometimes I even draw and sketch out with the brush. As you can see, my drawing, I don't draw detail. I just want to know where the main subject matter, negative shapes and the positive shapes are going to go as I begin to paint. So, I'm going to begin double loading my brush. And when I say double load, I'm going to be picking up the turquoise and a little bit of purple at the same time and double loading my brush as I begin to lay the color down in the background part, and I'm painting around everything that I want to kind of preserve as white. I'll rinse my brush out and I'll load up again. I'm going to add just a little bit of orange to that, give that just a little bit of warm and cool back in behind that. I always paint the edges and the sides. And if I get too much water in there, I like to just kind of roll that around and let it just mix its own neutrals. I just love the way it starts mixing. Again, I'm trying to use just pretty much more pigment than water. I'm not really interested in the mixing of the color. I just want just a lot of really nice transitions of those three triads. And I'm trying to make the value as dark as I want it to begin with, because I don't want to have to go back into this. If I have to go back into that, I'm going to lift up everything that I've just put down. So I'm going to strengthen that just a little bit more. May need a little of that purple down here on this corner. A little bit more turquoise. And let's add just a little bit more orange right in here. As you can see, where it's dry, the top edge of the little awning part, that's where I want the most contrast, right next to the white. So I'll just tilt that down so it just runs right down into that. Now I'm just moving on around. And again, I'm changing colors. I'm double loading the brush. I'm taking the water out of my brush every time I rinse my brush out. Make sure you do that. And if your sponge or your towel gets wet, always check that moisture in that towel, because if it's pretty wet, it's not going to take out very much moisture from your brush. Now I'm going to begin to add just some oranges. I'm going to pick up a few reds for these flowers over on this side. They're sitting in white pots. I'm going to make sure I take that color onto the side. I'm also going to paint around the support to that little awning. It has a lot of, the reference it's pretty well shadowed back. But I want to just lay in just some nice reflective colors. I'll paint around my figures and the little white awning here. I'm using the same triad of colors, which keeps the painting unified. I've got a lot of, in the study, there's yellow flowers. They've got just about every color of flower that you can think of that they're selling here in this market. And they were all fresh, and so I'm just going to begin adding some yellows, cool and warm, new gamboge, lemon yellow, And with that, I'm going to introduce some deeper reds, alizarin crimson. And I'm pushing those colors right into one another. I don't want them to be separate little, small little patches of flowers. I want them to look like the whole thing is just one shape with a variety of color and hues within that shape. Let's put a little bit of pink in with some of those. As I'm painting this, I'm still watching in these areas right here. I kind of like that area right there, but it may cause a little bit of issue here later. So I'm going to roll some of that paint around into that and kind of dilute some of that strong purple right there on the edge. And of course, when I start doing that, I have to make sure I'm watching and paying attention to everything that's wet, anything that would have what I call a bead. That's really some pretty areas right in there, so I think I just may leave on that. I didn't have that issue with on the paper, but I do on the canvas, and I kind of like what it's doing, so I think I'm just going to let that dry just like that. These flowers over here were in white containers. So I'll just go ahead and paint around just a few of those just to kind of give you some white areas. I guess that is just the habit from negative shape, because I do know with canvas, if I lose the white, all I have to do is pick up this little cosmetic sponge and just lift that color up gently, and it'll just pick it all just right up. And so I always keep one of those handy in case I do need to lift back to the white. I am going to pick up my reference because I want you to see just one thing that I really liked about this reference. I love the pattern of light down here. The pattern of light just really was interesting to me. You can see her shadow, which that doesn't really appeal to me, but I love these little patches of the little light areas. So I'm going to try to recreate just some of those down in the foreground. Again, remember that I can lift them out, but I'd much rather paint. I'd much rather paint them. I'll just paint through her and try to recreate just some of those really interesting little white shape patterns. Again, I'm still watching how that color is running and drying, and it dries rather quickly. This is already beginning to dry. A few more little shadow shapes over here in the corner to tone that down. I'm going to use just a little bit. Orange is one of my triad colors, but because quinacridone burnt orange is in that family of oranges, I'm going to use it to establish some buckets that these flowers are in. And all I really am looking for is just the color that suggests that. This just refers to, this suggests, that color suggests, the shape suggests. So always remember that sometimes we just need to suggest shapes, not actually paint them. Let's put another one right here. Now I think it's about time that we begin to add just a little bit of green. I'm going to get that bead down here flowing back up just a little bit more up into those yellow flowers, because I would like to add just some touches of some green right in here that would be in that area. So I'm going to use phthalo turquoise, and it's going to be used fairly strong with just a touch of orange in it. I'm going to show you my palette again so you kind of can see what it is I'm working with. This is that strong phthalo turquoise that I've just touched in with some of our orange that I've originally started with. And see how the pretty hues that it's mixing right here in the palette. I don't do cake batter. Cake batter is when you stir it all up at one time. I like for those colors to just have lumps in them, to have kind of mix and just have an interesting pattern of color, because that's what I like to apply to the paper or the canvas. And I'm just going to introduce that green right into some of these colors. As I come on over to this area, these were just kind of little interesting little flats that had all kinds of green plants in them, and I don't want to paint all of those. I'm going to give you a suggestion of what those are. Some of them had like little blue labels, which I'll pick up a little cobalt blue and just use just for the label part of those little containers. And in those containers, they're mostly greens. I've got enough color, so I'm just going to begin to tone down and use some green in these areas. This is not the most important part of the painting. So I'm just going to, I need to probably put a little yellow in that just to lighten those just a little bit. This is getting pretty wet, and so what I would like to do is take a minute and let those colors kind of set. Well, I think I'll go ahead and finish this out. I'm going to use a little cobalt blue with that green because I'm changing greens. I want this to be more of a cool green over here to the edge. And I'm going to go ahead and push this back. I want a really dark back up and under this area here. I really want to push that window back. Those windows were very dark at the top, so that's what I want to do now, is to push those back. And I can begin to put just a few marks here and there. This figure that I have drawn back here, I'll paint around it. I'll put it in later after that is completely dry, but right now I want to just find where he is or her. Like I did this figure. That I didn't mean for that to run, but I'm not concerned because I can use my sponge to lift that up. I really didn't want to get that in the sky, or the background color, but that's okay. I'm just going to work with it. I'm going to add just a little bit of warmth back in where these little flat shapes are, also with a tree. Now I'm going to let some of that dry and pick up and clean up some of those areas, and then I'll come back in and we'll finish it. Now that this is dry, there's several areas that I need to pick up, and like I say, I'm going to use this little cosmetic sponge. You just buy them in drugstores or wherever, and the reason I use it is because it won't cut the canvas. It's very soft, and there's just a few of these, if you remember the runs I had, and you can see how easy it is to lift off a canvas. There's just a few places I want to lift here and there. I have a suggestion of shutter right back here that's turquoise, so I'm going to lift just a little bit of the light out of that. So when I go back in with my final, it'll stay just a little bit better. And down here I kind of lost some of my oranges and my reds, and I'm just going to gently pick up just some of those little blossoms and hard edges, so I can come back in and alter those just a little bit. I think those are the major things that I wanted to lift at this time. I'll just kind of go with what I have and see what what transpires here. Now I'm going to go back in. I'm going to get my figures in because they're the main focus of the painting. I'm going to use a little bit smaller brush than I've been using with that 1.5 inch. I'm going to just use, this is a 3/4 inch, I believe, and it's still synthetic. I'll use some of the orange that I've been using just for flesh color. And let's give this person over here some kind of a face, maybe. I have her in a red shirt, so I'm double loading my brush. I'm going to show you how I'm double loading my brush. I'm going to use alizarin crimson on one corner of this brush, on the corner. I'm going to use alizarin crimson, and I'm going to use orange. And if you can see, that brush is double loaded. And I want to put alizarin crimson where the shadow would be. There it is. And the orange would be on the light side. I like to try to make the shadow and the light all at the same time, then I don't have to go back into those areas. And that should stay just like that. I'm going to introduce cobalt blue, just a little bit, or cerulean, whichever you have, just for the bottom part of her skirt. And I'm going to push that color right into that because I want those two shapes to melt together. Now let's just suggest a leg down here. If I can get some paint on my brush, we will. Well, I may have to do just a little bit of cleanup on that, but for right now we'll just leave it like that. And let's just go ahead and put her just a shadow. This figure back here, I'll put it in cobalt blue because I have not used the blue that much in the painting, so therefore I want them to be just a little bit different from the rest that's going on because this painting is really busy with lots of color so far. I want to go back now and just touch in some yellows here for some of those real pretty flowers in the study. I'm using warm and cool yellows, New Gamboge, lemon yellow. Let's add just a little bit of quinacridone gold. I'm giving you the names of colors, but I like for my students to know the families of colors. Red has the family of color. It goes from alizarin crimson to a very light red, like cad red light or whatever. And all of those reds, all up and down the scale, they're a family of reds. Just learn to know whether they're cool, they're warm, they're dark, or they're light. Let's add a little bit of red. This is, I think that's Da Vinci red that I like. Now my little lady over here, my canvas is not behaving like I want it to, so let's see if we can't get that highlight back there just a little bit. While this is drying, I want to go and establish just some of the darker greens and push those greens up into those yellows. I'm using this smaller brush holds less water, so I'm able to use more dark since it's less water to push up in there, and it doesn't have a tendency to run as much. Now I'm just thinking about shape, just dark shapes, interesting shapes. I'm going to go back now to some of the flower shape and colors. Picking up just a little bit of some opaques here and there, so makes it a little bit more heavy rather than too transparent. I'm going to those buckets that I established. Let's put those in. And I think I have another one right here. And I'm using, if you can see the dry brush, you can tell that I'm using more pigment than I am paint. I want to go ahead and kind of finish this section up over here. I'm not really happy with. There's like a tree that's standing at this. I guess the side part of this flower shop, and it looked like it was a yopon or something like that. Don't ask me to write your nursery book. I'm not real sure about what was a yopon or what it is. It's just that it was just, I just looked at the shape and the green tree. That's all I was interested in. Those colors that I've laid back in behind there are going to leave a nice background. And by the way, I'm painting direct. When I say I'm painting direct, I'm painting the actual shape and the object. I'm not painting negative shape. And all my little flats down here kind of lost their identity. So let's just kind of bring a few of those back. And I'm just kind of pushing those colors together. Let's change some colors up. Let's put just a few little bit of those little flats had, like I said before, they kind of had a little blue container. And I'm going to join those there. And now I'm going to cast some kind of a shadow, just a line mark there, just to kind of introduce these shapes to these shapes. Now, I'm mixing in my palette some cobalt blue and some of that purple. I'm looking for just a really nice mid-gray. So I'm mixing also the complement of some little turquoise in there with that turquoise because I want to shadow. That's not going to be strong enough. I want to shadow some of these, the side of this little awning down. So let's just shadow that down. It still needs just a little bit more, color to it, a little bit more value. I'm going to strengthen that just a little bit because I also need to put some shadows up in the little awning. The little awning is white. So let's just put just a little bit of shadow here and there. Just kind of give it just a little bit of information. We'll set it down. I'm going to go ahead and put my little turquoise shutter, little dry brush there with it. I'll come back when it's dry to put the little slats, whatever they're called in the shutter business. I want to pick this up. Again, I'm not real crazy about this value here or the color. So I'm just going to take my sponge, it's just wet, and I'm going to pick that up and let that area dry to redo some of that. Now I'm beginning to pay attention to what's wet and what's dry. Where I need to add maybe just a few little accent colors to create just a little bit more interest in some areas. I need to finish these pots up over here. they need a pretty strong shadow. So I'm taking quite a bit of water out of my brush and picking up the purple and the turquoise for some shadows back in here. They just need to be set down. And the green kind of got away from us here, so let's just put just a little bit of orange on top of that. Now while this dries, I really need to address all of this under the little awning. And I'll show you again the reference. There's lights and darks and all, several colors, reflections, and everything in that awning. So I'm just going to come back and I'm just going to play with some line work back in this area. And I'm using pigment, very little water, because I have a dark and I want that dark to maintain its hard edge. I really need to define the little scalloped on the little awning there. And in doing that, now let's just soften that a little bit. I've got too much water in my brush. When it starts puddling like that, I've got to go back and pick up just paint. I don't want this to take more attention than this down here, so I'm just going to pick this bigger brush up, and now I'm going to begin to just soften those edges down just a little bit. I want to maintain just a few of those lights back in there because they're really nice, and I want it to appear like there's reflections back in behind all of this going on, but I just want those soft, not too many hard edges. Remember, hard edges always declare a shape or an object. Soft edges just flow from one to the next shape. Let's see what I've got here. I've kind of lost my little figure right here, and she's one of our main characters. So let's go back and see if I can't make her just a little bit more important here. I used cobalt before, so I'm going to go to ultramarine blue. It's still in the blue family. Cobalt will only be a mid-value. Ultramarine is a dark value, so therefore I think I need just a little bit of ultramarine on her skirt. Now let's put this is dry here, so let's put just a suggestion of maybe some hair, just a dark value. I'm going to have to pull her skirt down a little bit more because it's almost the same shape as her top, so let's make it just a little bit longer. I'm going to take a bigger brush, or a little brush that's got just a few long wispy hair in it, because while I'm letting this dry, I want to go ahead and kind of finish out some of this area over here by line work. And I'm using neutral tint. I like neutral tint. Neutral tint tones colors down. If you have a bright red, it needs to be toned down a little bit. Rather than using a complement, sometimes use neutral tint. Let's need just a little bit of line work here. I think this may be dry enough, maybe, to put in the and I have better luck by turning my brush sometimes sideways to make those little fine lines. This, I'm still not real happy with this right there. I'm going to pick that up with the with my sponge and let that dry just a minute and kind of go back in and redo some of that. This is when people get frustrated painting on canvas because they don't have enough control. And it really doesn't bother me not to have control sometimes. There's sometimes when I want control in a watercolor, and there's sometimes when I don't. Now that that's, I picked that up, I'm going to take just a paper towel and just lift a little of that. After that's wet with a sponge, if you don't kind of pick up some of that, it just dries faster when you do that. While I'm letting that dry, I want to put just a little bit of a shadow shape on these white little containers down here. And I'm just going to pick up what's next door to them and shadow those back. And I'm using neutral tint to really establish a dark at the base. I probably need just a few little darks here and there, back up and under here. Let's suggest just a few little stems. I think this area right in here, sometimes rather than using a brush, remember, a brush lifts those colors, and sometimes I just like to kind of splatter some of those areas. Sometimes I kind of consider splattering sometimes like a camouflage. It just puts those bright colors on top, and it just kind of pushes those colors in the background, just kind of pushes them. They're there, but they're not all that important. I'm I'm going to let that dry just a little bit. It may need just a little bit of yellow. And I'm just using those in the yellow family. This is Naples Yellow, which is extremely, extremely opaque. But I like it finish up work because if I need it to stay on top rather than melt in the rest of my paintings, and this holds true with canvas or paper. And you can pretty well tell. See how it stays on the top rather than the more transparent. I like I like the way those colors all came together. I'm liking what this is kind of doing over here. It's not too busy. I'll have to look at it when it completely dries here in a little bit to kind of see just exactly what I want to do with that. If there's anything I need to do with it. Let's just do a little splatter. Again, I'm using yellow ochre. It's in the yellow family and it is opaque. And it'll stay on top. I don't want it as bright as these. I want it a little bit more dull down here, just a little bit. I think that's dry enough for me to go back in now and put some darks and some lights back up in under here. I've double loaded my brush with purple and orange. And let's put in a little bit of yellow. My lady that started out with dark hair, she's been there so long, now she has white hair. She's been waiting for those flowers a long time. As I turned this up, unfortunately I had some areas that I thought was dry and they weren't, so therefore it ran down into my figure right here. So let's see if I can reclaim her quickly. And again, I'm using very little water. Also, I might need to mention that when you are painting on canvas, you want to make sure you have fresh paint. If you're just working out of a palette that you've been working in for a day or two, or maybe a year, some people, you need to put out some fresh paint, because if you try to work with paint that's been dried up in there, very small amounts, you just don't get the quality of pigment that you need. I'll put just a shadow under her, and I think I'm going to move that on around down in here, introduce it down into this foreground a little bit more. It needs to be a little bit stronger right down in some of these areas. And remember those little patterns of light that I spoke about earlier? I'm going to cut around some of those. Now, while this again is beginning to dry and her skin tone there kind of dries, let me see what I want to do up here. I think what I would like to do up there, I think I would like to lift just a few little areas. Let's try something like this. in some of these dark areas rather than having the windows that were back up and under there. Let's have them a little bit lighter, and then I'll make some of them darker. So we have a variety. And I'm using neutral tint as I come, and I'm just tapping that neutral tint to suggest the windows, door entrances, just anything that's back into this area. I'm not really trying to measure them off so each one of them are exactly that it should be. I just want just that suggestion. Now as I view some of this, let me see what it is that I need to, what really needs attention here. I think this area right in here, I kind of want to pull some of those areas right there just together just a little bit so they become a colorful one shape rather than red, yellow, yellow. Just kind of pull some of those colors into one another. I'm still not just real happy with her choice of clothing today. And it may be I'm trying to get this in too quick, too fast while it's still kind of wet. Now I'm going to let those set just a little bit. And like I say, if there's anything that needs just a little bit, these little white pots are a little bit strong. So and when I say strong, they're too much contrast. So I'm just going to take my brush and just gently with the colors next to them, those pigment next to them, just to glaze over those just a little bit. I can't glaze too much because, remember, I'll lift everything that's there. I think my palette's getting dry. Let's see if I can go around now and just make just a few little dark lines just to give it just a little bit more definition. And I'm using just the edge of that brush. And I'm doing this just to kind of break up all of this area here. Just kind of give you just a little something to interest to look at. In fact, I might even introduce, sometimes I use a stamp. I'm not real sure I want to do that on this small painting. This is a 12 by 16, so I'm not real sure I want to use that stamp on that. This, I keep losing her face, and it's just because it's wet. So I'm just going to pick that up, and surely it'll be dry here in just a minute, and I can redefine that. I want some signage. I had put some in the original and the paper, my study, I had a signage in the window right here, and I think I'm going to do the same thing here. And the reason I'm going to do that is just to break up some of this. I'm going to wipe out just a small little section right there. I'm just going to dry brush in just a little bit of a red. And I think I'll put just a little bit of purple to suggest that there's a shadow in with that. And then I'll put just some lettering on that just as soon as that dries. Again, let's let this dry, and while it's drying, I will wet my palette. My palette's getting rather, my palette's dry. My painting's wet, but my palette's dry. Okay, let's see if I can't put some closure on some of this. I'm just going to kind of take a section at a time and work just to see if it needs a light or a dark, or if it needs a little bit of splatter, just exactly what it needs. And I think right in here, in this area right where I put that shadow down, I'm going to wet my sponge. And again, like I said, with what's neat about canvas, you can sometimes pull out the light just a little bit. One thing, canvas is much like paper. If you pull out too much or scrub it too much, you still have an issue with it being dark. Well, not so dark, it just stains the canvas, and you can't really get back to the true white. I want to lift just a few of these little hard edges. While this was drying, as I looked at it, I've just had a few little hard edges. I think I just want them to kind of go away. My green, I think that's pretty well kind of what I want. I think that'll it tells me what it is, and I don't have to put too much more detail on it. I'm going to make these little spots of the little flats that's holding all the little seedlings down here. This is a sky blue, and it's a little bit more opaque than the cobalt. And so I'm just going to add just a little bit of that here and there, just to suggest I just really need another valued color right in there. So let's just do something like that. I'm also going to use this on this figure's shirt back here. I want to just kind of view this area in here, and it's working. I think it's pretty good. I think it needs just a few more darks, really strong darks, and I'm using phthalo turquoise, and a little bit of neutral tint, just to make that really pop out with some green. I probably need just a little bit of some suggestions of green on up into some of the flower shapes. I want to put just a little bit of a line work on this little that's too wet, but I'm just going to let it just melt in there together on this little sign. Let's put just a few more little suggestions. Again, this is just kind of, when I do this comes forward, it's kind of pushing all those colors there that looks like it's maybe inside the store. Let's see if I can, it's dry enough for me to let her have a little bit of flesh color on her. Maybe a little bit stronger arm there. I'm going to put a little bit, I'm going to use some cerulean blue. The reason I'm not real happy with that is because if you are familiar with ultramarine blue, it's real grainy, and that's just grainier than what I want. So I'm going to pick up some cerulean blue. And apparently my brush has got some yellow in it, so let's see if I can. I'm just gonna, with just kind of a dry brush, I'm just gonna kind of pick up the edge of that. I'm going to use a little bit darker value right back here to kind of push some of that back. Now let's see what I've got going up here. This area right in here, I think it reads well. I'm going to lift just a little bit of that green up and introduce just a very light value of yellow back in there. I think it was this color originally, but then all that kind of melted together there, so let's just kind of lighten some of that up. And again, it needs just a little bit of a dark right at the base to join those two shapes together, the pots and the, this will help push those pots back just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to see if I can't put just a few finishing touches on. I'm going to use my this little rigger brush, and it's just got neutral tint on it, pretty strong, very little water, and see if I can just make some suggestions of some lettering right here. This would be dry enough to. Also, the little flower store, the little awning thing here had some lettering on it, and it had something to do with flowers or I've always, when I put lettering on signage and everything, unless they want to pay me for advertising, I usually just make just a few little suggestions of letters and just to suggest something. Now I'm going to just put just a very light line on some of the little shadow shapes down here. And the only reason I'm doing that is to bring focus to those little white areas that I left. I think what I don't like about her skirt, or whatever she's got on here, is all the same value. So I'm going to lift some, oh, that's much better. I'm going to lift some of this blue off. Same thing with this. I want the light to be hitting, those shapes are not my best shapes, and by lifting that off, I have reshaped that area just a little bit and given it just a little bit of a highlight. Well, there's not too much of a line of demarcation there. That's more pleasing to me. He could have just a little bit, or she who walked back here could have just a little bit of that off of them. And I'm pretty close to being done. Let's see if I can gently just tilt her little this little figure just a little bit. Much better. Much better. Okay. I'm really liking all this area that I left back in here. That gives you the impression that there's stuff going back on inside the window area there. All these little broken colors, and we don't know what it is, but that's okay. We don't have to know. It's just got a little glare on the windows. So I think I'm going to quit at that.